Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the ultimate problem and solutions study guide for the foundational years of the United States. We're looking at the critical period from 1763 to 1824. We're going to unpack the incredible tensions, the massive failures, and the brilliant compromises that essentially architected American liberty. Let's map out exactly how we got from 13 rebellious colonies to a unified constitutional republic. Here's our syllabus for today. First up, the origins of independence. Second, why the first government fails. Third, key constitutional compromises, followed by the evolution of federal power. And finally, we'll lock it all in with a study guide review. Our 60-year timeline tracks a massive philosophical pivot for the country. We start in 1763 with colonists seriously chafing under British rules, pushing toward the 1776 Declaration of Independence. Then we see the initial misstep of the 1781 Articles of Confederation, the vital course correction at the 1787 Constitutional Convention, and finally, the landmark judicial milestones of Marbury and Givens. It's a rapid, chaotic shift from destroying a strong British government to building a strong American one. All right, let's jump into Section 1, Origins of Independence, the spark of rebellion. So, our very first major problem was Great Britain's massive debt from the French and Indian War. To extract revenue from the colonies, Britain passed the Proclamation of 1763, the Stamp Act, and the notoriously harsh Chorus of Acts. But notice the clear chain of cause and effect here. Every single British attempt to exert control was met with an equal and opposite colonial reaction. We're talking boycotts, the Organization of the Sons of Liberty, and the Boston Tea Party. They were literally pushing each other to the absolute brink. Now, the colonists weren't just throwing a tantrum. They had a profound philosophical justification, rooted right in the Enlightenment. John Locke argued for natural rights, the core idea that you are born with the right to life, liberty, and property. Crucially, this system requires the consent of the governed, hence the rallying cry, no taxation without representation. This was the exact vocabulary Thomas Jefferson weaponized in 1776 to justify the Declaration of Independence. Moving right along to Section 2, the first government fails, a stumbling start. Winning the Revolutionary War was really only half the battle. Their first attempt at self-governance, the Articles of Confederation, successfully prevented a new tyranny, sure, but as history shows, it completely failed to unify the economy. Congress couldn't raise taxes, they couldn't regulate trade. When desperate, debt-ridden farmers launched Shays' Rebellion, the central government was simply too weak to even muster a response. The entire system was functionally paralyzed. Which brings us to Section 3, Key Constitutional Compromises, the Great Compromise. Recognizing that this loose, weak alliance just wasn't working, delegates met in 1787 and drafted the U.S. Constitution. Their ultimate goal? Give the government some actual teeth without creating a new tyrant. They pulled this off through federalism, cleverly dividing power between the states and the central government. They implemented separation of powers across 3 distinct branches, and then layered in checks and balances to ensure constant, deliberate friction so no single branch could ever dominate. But getting this brilliant framework approved nearly tore the brand new nation apart. You had Alexander Hamilton and James Madison leading the Federalists, demanding strong central authority to keep things stable. On the flip side, the anti-Federalists were terrified. They basically saw a powerful new federal government as just a localized version of a British king, and they fiercely opposed it because it lacked explicit protections for individual everyday rights. So, to secure ratification and solve this massive standoff, a grand compromise was struck, the Bill of Rights. Adopted in 1791, these first 10 amendments established hard, non-negotiable boundaries against the government by guaranteeing free speech, religion and the press, and protecting citizens against unreasonable searches. This specific compromise became the glue that held the entire founding framework together. That takes us to Section 4, Evolution of Federal Power, Testing the Framework. With the rules finally written down, it was time to actually test them. George Washington set the initial precedents, but the real test came from inside his own cabinet, where Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson famously despised each other. Hamilton pushed a very strong Federalist agenda, advocating for a national bank and economic stabilization. Jefferson, on the other hand, led the Democratic Republicans, heavily advocating for states' rights and vehemently opposing that bank. This bitter rivalry birthed the first political parties, completely ignoring Washington's strict warnings against them. This intense rivalry ultimately culminated in the election of 1800, which is a massive milestone on our study guide. Why? Because it marked the very first peaceful transfer of power between rival political parties. When Jefferson won, Hamilton's party stepped down without starting a war. It proved the ultimate stress test. It showed the world that this new constitutional system could actually handle deep, bitter ideological conflict without resorting to violence. But the evolution of federal power wasn't just up to the politicians. Chief Justice John Marshall systematically used the Supreme Court to cement federal supremacy. In 1803, Marbury v. Madison established judicial review. Then, in 1819, McCulloch v. Maryland upheld federal authority over the states. And by 1824, Gibbons v. Ogden reinforced federal control over interstate commerce. Through these rulings, the judiciary had officially arrived as a powerful, co-equal branch of the government. All right, let's bring it all home with Section 5, Study Guide Review, Knowledge Check. Let's lock in this historical vocabulary with a quick rapid-fire review. Question 1. What core Enlightenment idea argues that a government only gets its power from the permission of the people? Think back to the exact philosophical justifications Thomas Jefferson used against the British king.
Exactly, it's the consent of the governed. This is the foundational social contract we talked about, and it's a direct rejection of taxation without representation.
Okay, question 2. Which pivotal 1803 Supreme Court case established the power of judicial review, effectively making the judiciary a true co-equal branch? That's right, it's Marbury v. Madison, a totally monumental ruling that gave the Supreme Court the final say on what is and isn't constitutional. Let's hit question 3. What constitutional system ensures that no single branch of government becomes too powerful? Remember, the framers were absolutely terrified of accidentally creating another king. The answer is checks and balances. Through this system, the Constitution brilliantly ensures a constant, deliberate friction between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. Finally, I want to leave you with this crucial question to ponder. If the framers spent the years between 1763 and 1824 arguing so fiercely over state versus federal power, how is that exact same debate still shaping the laws and rights we experience today? It's a powerful reminder that the grand experiment launched by these architects of liberty isn't just dusty history. It is a living framework being actively tested right now in our modern world. Thanks so much for joining this explainer. Keep studying and keep asking questions.